Hello and welcome to Level Design Videos, episode 1. My name is Mateusz Piaskiewicz and today I'll be talking about a level design principle called familiarity. Before going into details, let me tell you exactly how I understand the principle. So for me, a design principle is sometimes it's a simple word, like for example, simplicity, or a short sentence like less is more. These words for me are containers that hide something bigger. And by saying bigger, I mean some kind of design wisdom, or like a good practice, or a set of design rules. These principles can be used to make a better design decision or validate ideas. So, for example, when I'm thinking about, let's say, a principle called similarity, there's a bunch of questions that appears in my mind. Can I simplify this space? Or is there something I can remove from the layout? The other cool thing with principles is that if a design team has established definitions for principles, like for example, that less is more, then imagine that you have a meeting. You talk about the idea for layout for the level, and someone actually is using that principle, less is more. And the best part of that is actually the whole team is on the same page. They exactly know what the person meant and what should be checked, or what's the problem, what kind of problem we want to solve. So imagine how much time you can save and confusion. But yeah, okay, let's get into details with the familiarity principle. I'll bring one example to show how it works. So it will be Half-Life 2. When Jimin appeared in the opening sequence for the first time, well, Half-Life 1 players would say, hey, I know this guy. And then you can hear that familiar buzz sound, the reactor sound. And after that, you can actually see the reactor scene. And what I think with that scene is narrative guys probably said, like, okay, yeah, we need to seal the experience from Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2. But there's a very cool, I think maybe it's a side effect or maybe it's intentional, but it exactly touches the familiarity principle. So the familiarity comes here by bringing experiences from Half-Life 1. In this case, these are, I would say, positive memories. And that's how it works. Like you bring, for example, familiar faces, expressions, sounds, spaces. And people are getting that, aha, hey, I know that moment. And when actually this happens, it's very similar in the brain to that positive results of pattern recognition. When you solve the puzzle, you find a solution, or you have an answer for the question and you know it's good. So you feel that anticipation is like, yes, okay, I know that. So this thing sets players in a really positive, excited state. As a reminder, that's actually... Oh wait, trolley is coming. Okay, it's gone. And in psychology, we can call that the player is getting a reward, but it's not literally a reward, like a treasure or a badge. I'm talking about a positive feeling that makes him want more, like doing more of that experience or of that activity. Okay, but you'll probably say, like, okay, Matt, but how it relates to level design and why actually we're doing that. So, okay, let me tell you. When you do that, you put player in a positive state of mind. And because of that, they are less worried about the unknowns. And they feel control, like they know something. When you go to the party and you see people that you feel way different, that you're in a place that everything is unknown and you already paid a bunch of money for that. So that's the difference, right? So people that are in that state are way more willing to take risk, and usually they are more creative. What's more, positive players are way more immune to failure, like something is going wrong with a game, like bugs, or frustration, like players are not performing well in the game. And that's exactly what designers want in a game, right? Okay, so we have players that already connected first dots, they feel good. And for example, they encounter bumpy experience, like a frustration. They will approach that with more with a more forgiving mindset, like because of their past positive experiences. But when player is neutral or even negative about a game, frustrating moments can hit the experience stronger. Like I used to call that there's no relationship between the player and the game. So it's way more easy. Well, like with this attitude, players will be more into, like, let's say, giving low scores in reviews, or it will show in the playtime. Players will be less willing to stay in the game when they don't have that relationship. Okay, but you'll say, like, hey, Matt, but what about people that haven't played Half-Life 1? And what I would say, yes, like these players see G-Man for the first time and they just cannot resonate with the events or with that character. So we are not getting what designers intended. For the player, familiarity might bring positive memories, but for other player, it could be, well, in a good case, it's neutral, but in a worst case, it could bring confusion or even frustration because of a misunderstanding. So designers really need to be aware that the familiarity principle always resonates with certain percentage of the audience, not with everyone. We cannot just apply that blindly and hope that everybody will, play the previous game, or they perfectly know that concept. We need to prepare something special for the newcomers. And in Half-Life 2 example that I mentioned earlier, luckily G-Man is interesting character in general. Like there's a spectacle happening on his face. So it adds enough curiosity to actually hold that even for newcomers. And I think like the whole scene defends itself pretty nicely. Like familiar players are just getting more from it, and it could be pretty cool. Like imagine that people are checking forums or just like asking friends, hey, do you know this guy? Yes, of course, it's G-Man. It's like, okay, yeah, let's Google it, right? You can use familiarity as a base for other principles, and I hope that in next episode I'll be talking more about mystery. Now I'll show you how exactly you can mix both principles. So okay, when you start Half-Life 2, when you jump off the train, you can see a Vortigon cleaning the floor. When you go straight on a train station, the first room, and turn right, which feels like you're actually taking a side path. So you see this guy guarded by a metro cop, and Half-Life players actually are familiar with this guy. Like they know that Vortigons were actually bad guys, like the enemies. They tried to kill you. So here's the first mystery. What happened? Why he's cleaning floor? Why he's actually being guarded by the metro cop? And why do they serve people? So the funny thing is, like, the similar metro cop, few meters from that location, is actually beating a civilian. That makes that even more bizarre. Like, what is going on here? That's a lot of questions. And see these questions, players are curious. And I'm really happy when that happens, because it means that designers are making a great job. That's exactly what we want with Mystery Principle. Being curious actually invites to explore, to want to see more, to stay in the game. That's exactly what we want to have in the opening sequence. And again, I'm not sure if designers from Valve made that intentional. I'm just reverse engineering the scene, and this is how I would do that. But I think that designers here created a perfect condition for that curiosity to arise. And remember that the game just started. Like, players made a few steps, and they've already placed them in a good mindset, and they were being rewarded for exploration. That's great design. Okay, but let's drop off the Half-Life 2 example. And I mean, we'll come back to Half-Life, but now I want to tell you that actually familiarity is used everywhere. It's a thing that gives a well-known starting point, so players actually are confident in the face of upcoming unknowns. And that's why a bunch of companies or games or franchises actually hire famous actors, or they use well-known events or locations, or they even license popular music, for example, like for the game soundtrack, right? And there's a thing that Mark Rosewater calls piggybacking. It's like using players' existing knowledge to make our job easier. And I think exactly, like, often putting familiarity in the game is piggybacking on something that is not ours, but is already established in the culture. For example, like, games can reference military uniforms, locations, architecture, right? This also applies to game design, like using the same control schemes or even established, rules can give players a better head start, like especially in multiplayer games. And I'll quote Mark Rosewater again. Once he said, "Never fight human nature." So when we already have some kind of general conventions that are well established and liked, and we don't want to break them, we should actually piggyback on them. Like, we want to use that, because changing that, like changing control mappings in a shooter, if you don't have a good reason, that's risky. And it sounds limiting, but think about that in this way. By knowing this rule, you can actually intentionally break it to consciously innovate. Oh, trolley's coming. Okay, he's gone. It's very important to mention that there's a thin line between building familiarity and actually reusing of content. Like, there might be some kind of obvious reuse, and this will probably raise negative reaction and like a feeling of cheap trick or something that developers use to actually save money. So it's a very context-sensitive problem, and all I can give you is actually like making you aware of an issue, like sensitize you to watch for it. Like, in general, we want to provide a bit of new to the player when he's already familiarized with something old. Going back to Half-Life 2, actually, the whole game is full of tiny bits of familiarity. Like, for example, let's look at Dr. Kleiner's lab. This area gives a huge injection of familiarity. So you will encounter the same voice actors from the first Half-Life. You will see the head crab. You'll get HEV suit, right? A few meters later, you actually are getting the symbol of the game. You're getting the crowbar, and when your first trolley. Okay, your first task was actually, destroy the wooden planks, and the sound is very, very similar to the one from Half-Life 2. So you're getting, oh, that's pizza. Yay, wait. Okay, sorry, I love pizza. But yeah, coming back to the topic. In Half-Life 2, familiar topics, themes, elements are also helping the main theme of the, I would say, oppression from Combine. Check, for example, police uniforms, how they look. Like, it looks almost like Nazi uniforms from World War II. All these fences around, the patrolling guards, surveillance, checkpoint gates, that all reminds us of occupation. And the whole game really wants to tell us, to make us perceive Combine as the bad guys. Like, there will be no misunderstanding. And the cool thing here is, from history books, we know about World War II occupation, so we understand what is going on, and also we can anticipate how it can end up, what can happen. When our expectations are met, we're getting a good feeling because our knowledge was actually useful in the game. Therefore, we think about the experience of the game as authentic. It covers with our beliefs of what we know. Okay, now let me tell you exactly how I use that principle, like, in my day-to-day design work. So I want to create things that are relatable for players. Like, that's my general principle. Like, I always try to do that. And that means that all the locations or events I want to create will be easy to understand for the player. So there's no need to some kind of like giving extensive information. And familiarity principle actually is a big part of it. So first, I'm researching a given topic to get a better understanding of what I could reference in my work. I don't want to rely only on my mental models. So that's why I'm like checking how other cultures understand, for example, like medieval castles, for example, right? And to use familiarity, I have to familiarize myself with a topic to see how others see that. In other case, I was using a familiar concept of magic to, for example, justify spawning demons in front of the player. Like, I have shown to players how magic portals work, and players learn that demons can actually use portals. Like, it was already established in other games, so I'm not doing anything wildly wrong, I would say. And actually, it really profited on the design side. I was able to spawn enemies with larger control on the combat flow and timing, and that turned into more engaging and dynamic combat situations. So imagine that we don't have that magic. Like, we need to actually find believable spawn location for soldiers, for example. Like, it's not, we would look for places to place spawn closets. We cannot just appear them in front of a player with a funny FX. Yeah. Like, let's see other example. Like, take something well known and let's mix it with something less usual to make it interesting and relatable. So let's take Los Angeles and make it, for example, deserted, like Boneyard from Fallout. And for example, like, it could be really interesting. Like, I'm really curious how locations like, let's say, scavenged Rodeo Drive would look like, or flooded streets of Venice, or a bandit fortress in Disneyland, right? Well, a lot of people know something about Disneyland, like the core landmarks, how the entrance looks like, or the castle in the middle. But some people actually had a chance to visit the Disneyland, and it would be even stronger for them. Still, the whole concept of having a theme park that is turned into post-apocalyptic headquarters of bandits, that could be interesting. And all this effort I put into design is just to get a proper response from the player. I want to have that positive aha moment. Like, I want players to think like, hey, I know this place, I understand this, and I can build expectations on that. Or it feels good when the game uses my, past experience or my knowledge from real world, right? Okay. Now let's talk about problems with familiarity or any kind of mistakes that we can make. The very common newbie mistake is just going crazy with creativity and making something super fancy. That actually creates confusion. It's way different than expected, and that's actually the problem. Like, imagine that we have to make a sci-fi door. And designers can come up with really crazy stuff, but honestly, all we need is something that looks like a door, that acts like a door, like behaves like a door, affords actions like a door, and it works like a door. And the most important thing is that player has to get it in a split second. Like, he needs to make a decision, for example, during combat on if he's picking that location, that part of a room because there are doors, or he's confusing that fancy door with something non-interactive, like a decoration. And actually, he might miss a lot because of our newbie mistake. But to be honest, like, actually in the past, I've made a lot of levels like that people didn't understand. I was not thinking about familiarity. For example, I want to make something really fancy, something that never any game ever made. And I remember one location where I was making a bandit hideout in a bank in a post-apocalyptic world. And I iterated to the point where it no longer looked really like a bank. Like, I wanted to add a twist on a familiar building, and I ended up with something that looked like I would say a fancy junkyard. Like, there was a bunch of junk around. So when players were reaching that location, they found a bank vault. They said like, "Wow, that's a very fancy junkyard. Like, is it like the junkyards right now looks like that?" Or maybe junk is like super valuable in the game world, so it's very useful to collect that. Like, see, this is how actually you can excite players about something that is completely wrong. Like, there's nothing cool in junkyard. It only looks like a fancy bank-ish junkyard, right? Okay, so next time when you come up with a fresh and never seen before layout or a very fancy concept, think how to mix that with something familiar to get more traction for players. Maybe our ideas are just too fancy and players simply won't get it. So yeah, think about how you can give them traction with something they know and how to buzz their brain with something positive, especially at the beginning when they really have a hard time with a new game. Yeah, exactly. All right. That's it for now, and I hope I'll find time and chances to record more episodes, because I have tons of things to actually tell you. And the other thing is, all these design principles that I'll be talking about will be written in my level design book that I'm preparing. So far is really massive, so probably I will ship it in multiple volumes, but more information on this topic soon on the website. So for now, thanks for listening and supporting LEVEL-DESIGN.org. I want to use this opportunity to shout out to all the current and past patrons and all the supporters from other channels, because this cast and the website can actually exist thanks to you guys and thanks to your support. So thank you very much. Okay, if you feel that I'm sharing useful knowledge and you want more, follow me on Twitter. It's LEVEL-DESIGN.org. Then go to LEVEL-DESIGN.org and support the website by dropping a buck into the Patreon jar. Feel free to contact me via email and share your thoughts. Feel free to ask questions and let me know what you'd like to hear in next episodes. Thank you again. It was Mateusz Piaskiewicz talking about the familiarity principle. Thanks for listening. See you soon.